What's going on? Today we're going to talk about one of the most important movements and one of the most important muscle groups that you use for functional movement and power, which is the hips and the hip hinge. Because most people use their back instead of their hips. The hips are a very important muscle group because we use them for 2 of our top 10 recommended exercises, actually 3, but we're going to cover 2 of those today, which one is the hip hinge deadlift, the other is the bent over row. Those 2 are related. I call them cousins. You just change the primary mover from your hamstrings to your back. Hamstrings is for the hip hinge deadlift, the back being for the bent over row. All right? So it looks like this. Hip hinge for the deadlift, we keep the arms locked out, upper back straight, hinge at the hip, push back, then pull. For the bent over row, we simply hinge at the hip like we're going to do a deadlift, hold that position, feeling the hamstrings engaged, abs engaged, spine stabilized, and then we row, pulling with the primary mover, which is now our back, pulling the shoulder blades in towards the spine, activating the lats, and pulling up and in while stabilizing through the hamstrings. A proper hip hinge means that you will not bend over, but rather that you will push into the hips and glutes, using the hips, hamstrings, and glutes to extend back and then close the hip coming up. So we open the hip as we push back, allowing the knees to relax. Don't hyperextend at the knee. Keep the knees relaxed. Weight through the heel and then pull to come up. All while keeping the stabilization of the upper body. We want to make sure we stabilize our upper body while hinging at the hip. What that means is we cannot bend over. Most people bend over, which is why they put pressure on their back. So while we stabilize the abdomen, we also stabilize the spine and our upper back. We hinge at the hip while stabilizing. Basically, we're going to push instead of bending over. We're going to push back at the hip until we are in a plank position with our upper body while holding a plank. So we hinge at the hip, creating an angle right here and a crease at the hip by pushing back, and then we come up, pulling forward. Now, what I mean by a plank is making sure that you keep your spine, abs, and upper back stabilized, and you don't look up as you go down. You keep the stabilization all the way through into the plank, and then back up. In order to do both of those movements properly, you must be able to first hinge at the hip properly. Once you can hinge at the hip, then you'll be able to do either of those functional movements with more efficiency and more effectiveness to get better results. Remember, the better the technique, the better the results. Mindset is the most important set. Train the brain, and the body will follow. Let's get it.